Good morning, students. I hope you are all fine. It's our social studies class, and I am your teacher, Sardav Shokat. I hope you are ready to learn something new today. And our topic for today is unit number 11, the role of media. Media plays a very important role in our lives. It helps people communicate, share information, and stay connected with the world. In the past, people did not have mobile phones, internet, or television. They used very simple and slow methods to send messages and share news. However, with time, science and technology developed and new inventions made communication much faster and easier. In this chapter, we will learn how people sent messages in the past, how railway communication systems worked, how newspapers started and developed, and how radio and television became important sources of news. We will also learn about advertising and how it helps businesses promote their products. By the end of this lesson, you will understand how media has changed over time and how it affects our daily life. Dear students, I am going to read from the book. First of all, I'll read, then I'll explain it. Our first heading is Sending Messages. The subcontinent had a very old mail system. People paid runners to take messages and packages from one place to another. They paid by weight and distance. When the British East India Company ruled Sindh, they needed faster mail. So in 1851, they used horses and camels instead of runners. They used stamps called Sintedok. They were the first postage stamps in all of Asia. Scientists and inventors worked at sending messages using electricity and magnetism. The messages spelled words using a code. There were many different codes. In Russia, Pavel Shillingmore made the first electric telegraph in 1832. It could send messages along wires from one room to another. By the 1860s, there were telegraph cables between towns and cities and even under the seas to link continents. Friends, I am going to explain it. Please listen it carefully. In the early days, communication was very slow and difficult. In the subcontinent, people used a system where runners were hired to carry messages and packages from one place to another. These runners traveled long distances on foot, and they were paid based on how far they traveled and how heavy the message or package was. This method was not only slow but also tiring and sometimes unsafe. When the British East India Company came to power in Sindh, they needed a faster and more reliable system of communication for administration and control. In 1851, they improved the system by using horses and camels instead of runners. This made the delivery of messages quicker. They also introduced special postage stamps known as Sintidok, which were the first postage stamps used in Asia. This was an important step in the development of a proper postal system. Later, scientists and inventors began experimenting with electricity and magnetism to send messages. They created systems where messages could be sent using coded signals. One of the most important inventions was the electric telegraph, developed by Pavel Schilling in Russia 1832. This device could send messages through wires using electric signals. Over time, telegraph systems improved, and by the 1860s, telegraph wires connected cities, towns, and even continents through cables laid under the sea. This invention greatly reduced the time needed to send messages and made communication much faster than before. Now, dear students, next heading on the next page, which is railway communications. The first trains were pulled by horses and went very slowly. A horse rider went ahead of the train beside the track. He waved a flag to say that a train was coming. Later, steam trains had whistles that the driver could sound using steam from the boiler. Where tracks met, signalmen used their arms and hands to show train drivers which way to go. Signalmen moved parts of tracks to let trains go from track one to another. Railway companies put up tall poles with signal bars. Train drivers could see them from far away unless it was very dark or foggy. Signalmen moved the bars up or down with levers. Train drivers knew what messages the bars were giving. Now, dear students, from the next page, a train driver didn't know if another train was stuck on the track if he couldn't see it. It took a long time for signalmen to walk along the track to get a message to the driver. So there were a lot of crashes. The electric telegraph made it much quicker to send messages. By the 1850s, there were signal boxes. A signalman could use levers to change signals in different places, but not very far away. Electricity helped to make railways safer. Signals and moving parts of tracks could be changed quickly using electric switches. Now, dear students, I am going to explain it. Please listen it carefully. In the beginning, railway systems were very simple and not very safe. The earliest trains were pulled by horses and moved very slowly. To warn people and avoid accidents, a horse rider would go ahead of the train and wave a flag to signal that a train was coming. This method depended heavily on human effort and was not always reliable. As technology improved, steam trains were introduced. These trains were faster and used whistles to warn people and communicate with others. However, communication between train drivers and railway staff was still limited. At railway junctions, signalmen used hand signals to guide train drivers and show them which direction to go. They also manually changed tracks so that trains could move from one line to another. Later, railway companies installed tall signal poles with movable bars. These signals could be seen from a distance and helped drivers understand whether to stop or go. However, these signals were not effective in bad weather, such as fog or darkness. Because there was no quick way to communicate problems, train drivers often did not know if another train was on the same track, which led to many accidents. The invention of the electric telegraph greatly improved railway communication. It allowed signalmen to send messages quickly over long distances. By the 1850s, signal boxes were introduced where signalmen used levers to control signals at different points. Later, electricity made the system even safer and more efficient. Signals and track movements could be controlled quickly using electric switches, reducing the chances of accidents and making railway travel much safer. Now, dear students, next heading on the same page, which is the news in print. Before printing was invented, people gave out news in different ways. They called it out in towns or wrote or drew pictures on paper or other materials. Some carved words and pictures into stone, metal, or wood. When the British East India Company ruled the subcontinent, the newspapers here were all in English. The news was about the British. The first newspaper was printed in 1766. The editor criticized the British East India Company. He was sent back to Britain. Another British editor wrote about corruption in the company and about the suffering of Indian people. The company fined him and put him in prison. The newspaper closed. Later, there were other English language newspapers in the places ruled by Britain. One of these was Dawn. Dear students, from next page, Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah started Dawn in 1941 in Delhi. The Muslim League used it for their news. In 1946, the editor urged Muslims to take part in protests to support the partition of the subcontinent. Now Dawn has offices in Karachi, Lahore, and Islamabad. Dear students, I am going to explain it. Please listen it carefully. Before the invention of printing, people shared news in very simple ways. They would announce news loudly in public places, write messages on paper, or draw pictures to explain events. In some cases, important information was carved into stone, metal, or wood so that people could read it. When the British ruled the subcontinent, newspapers began to appear, but they were mostly in English and focused on British interests. The first newspaper in the region was printed in 1766. Its editor openly criticized the British East India Company, which led to serious consequences. He was forced to return to Britain. Another editor who wrote about corruption and the suffering of local people was fined and imprisoned, and his newspaper was shut down. This shows that freedom of the press was very limited at that time. Despite these challenges, newspapers continued to grow and became an important source of information. One of the most important newspaper was Dawn, started in 1941 in Delhi by Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. It was used by the Muslim League to share their ideas and inform people about political developments. In 1946, its editor encouraged Muslims to participate in protests supporting the partition of the subcontinent. Today, Dawn is still a well known newspaper with offices in major cities like Karachi, Lahore, and Islamabad, and it continues to play an important role in informing the public. Now, dear students, next heading on the next page, which is the news on air. Around the beginning of the 20th century, governments began to use radio to send out news. Then, radio manufacturers and large shops started small radio stations. This helped them to sell radios because people would have programs to listen to. Newspapers had small radio stations for broadcasting their opinions as well as news. In the 1920s, radio technology became much better and more people had radios. Radio companies started to broadcast entertainment programs and news. There was also some television broadcasting, but very few people had TV sets. The Indian Broadcasting Company began radio broadcasting in the subcontinent in 1927. Later, the government took over. It named the company All India Radio. Now, from the next page. In 1947, All India Radio had three radio stations in the area that became Pakistan. The Pakistan government took these over. It started the Pakistan Broadcasting Corporation. Most households in the subcontinent had radios. The world's first public service television broadcasting company was the BBC. It began in 1922 but could not broadcast over very long distances. Very few people in the world had TV sets then. Pakistan television began broadcasting in 1964. Now, dear students, I am going to explain it. Please listen it carefully. In the early 20th century, a new form of communication was developed: radio broadcasting. Governments began using radio to share news with the public. At the same time, radio manufacturers and businesses started their own radio stations to encourage people to buy radios. This helped increase the popularity of radio as a source of information and entertainment. During the 1920s, radio technology improved significantly, and more people started owning radios. Radio programs included news, music, and entertainment, which made it very popular among the public. Some newspapers also started their own radio stations to broadcast their views and news. In 1927, the Indian Broadcasting Company started radio services in the subcontinent. Later, the government took control and renamed it All India Radio. After the creation of Pakistan in 1947, the Pakistan government took over radio stations in its territory and established the Pakistan Broadcasting Corporation. Radio became very common and most households had access to it. Now, dear students, another heading on the same page, which is advertising. There have been advertisements since ancient times. They used the media of the time: papyrus, wood, or stone. The first newspaper advertisement was printed in France in 1836. A company paid the newspaper to print the advertisement. Soon all newspapers had advertisements. Students, from next page. Another way to advertise is to tell people about goods or services. One way is to call out to people in towns and cities. To make people listen, the advertiser could sing, dance, or entertain people in another way. Radio advertisements also entertain with music and songs. These help to make people remember the advertisement. Radio advertisements could reach many people at the same time. In the 1920s, businesses in the USA began to pay for radio programs. In return, their products were talked about on their radio. In the 1940s, they began to do the same on television. Dear students, I am going to explain it. Please listen it carefully. Advertising is not a new concept. It has existed since ancient times. In the past, people used available materials like papyrus, wood, or stone to promote goods and services. These early forms of advertising were simple but effective in informing people about products. The first newspaper advertisement appeared in France in 1836. Companies paid newspapers to publish their advertisements, and this quickly became a common practice. Soon, advertisements became an important part of newspapers and helped businesses reach more customers. Another traditional method of advertising was by calling out in markets and public places. Advertisers often used creative ways to attract attention, such as singing, dancing, or entertaining people. This made the advertisements more interesting and memorable. With the invention of radio, advertising reached a new level. Radio advertisements used music and songs to make them more appealing. In the 1920s, businesses in the United States began sponsoring radio programs to promote their products. Later in the 1940s, this practice expanded to television. Advertising became more powerful as it could reach a large audience at the same time and influence people's choices. Now, dear students, you will make a presentation about the chapter The Role of Media, and you should include the following topics in your presentation: introduction of media, sending messages in the past, development of the telegraph, railway communication, the news in print, Dawn newspaper, the news on air, Pakistan Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, advertising in the past and present. Best of luck, students.